All right. Sandra,
We're live.
Sandra, we're live. Do you want to good morning?
Yeah,
you want to? I'm passing it back to you. We had a moment of technical zen, but I think we're on track. And let's go.
We're fully back on track, Gordon. And as always, this is another Crypto Wednesday. We're excited. We're always looking forward to the next show, next couple of guests. So welcome everybody that's watching the live stream, and also for the people that are watching the recording afterwards. We're very happy to also have you here joining the community. Today we've got some really exciting guest speakers among us. Some people already participated as guest speakers during previous weeks. And I think this is number 11 that we're already on the road. So Crypto Wednesday number 11. And this is an initiative that Gordon and myself took. Like I said, 11 weeks ago, we said, well, why don't we organize a Crypto Wednesday where we give back to the community and invite our industry friends to share their insights or their latest projects or developments that are currently running, what they're excited about. And we're happy to do that. And today I'm broadcasting. I'm back in Amsterdam. Last week I was in Portugal, in Faro, Portugal. Now I'm back in Amsterdam at the home office. And I'm curious, Gordon, I think you're still in LA today?
I'm still in LA. That's yet another day of me just wearing a t-shirt and not pretending to wear a suit. Just because it's so bloody hot here, and it's 5:30 in the morning. So again, this is dedication to crypto, and I want everyone to be like this, okay? Or crazy like our guests. So yes, and I'm in LA. Dear God, let me out. So that Kurt Russell movie, Escape from LA. I'm just waiting for that moment. So
and we all appreciate you waking up at 5:30 a.m. But this is the best time to get free continents involved, because like last week we had our friends from Singapore. We had Anndy Lian in the show, so we got a lot of attendance also in the Asian market, which we really appreciate. So everybody again watching from Asia, we're happy to have you here. But we have people from all over, so from Asia, from Europe, of course, but also from the US, North American markets. So let's get the show started. Maybe Gordon, I hand over to you first, because you can do a little quick intro towards our guest of today.
Sure. Just quick reminder to everyone, just to keep things under control on Zoom bombing and all that other jazz. Please put comments and questions into the chat. We're happy to have for the most part, though we make exceptions. It's going to be our alumni speakers who are going to join in later in the conversation. So just bear with us as we kind of do a little bit of crowd control, because this is a live show. We are streaming live. Everyone's not joining us on Zoom. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests. These fine gentlemen. I'm going to start with Luke Stokes. Luke, unmute yourself. Peace, brother. And Luke, I haven't known super long, but I've had the pleasure recently of working with him on a project. Very interesting, thoughtful, kind of peaceful in a way guy. Interesting. I don't know. It's like I'll let him explain more about himself and his background. But Luke, I want to thank you for sort of collaborating with me on the show idea, and then involving your friends, colleagues, sparring partners, who I'm going to introduce next. I'm just going to go from left to right, so not in order of precedence. So look, right in front of me is Xavier Hawk, suave international crypto man of mystery, coming to us from East Coast time, hair slicked back, skull of animal behind him. Xavier, yes. Exactly. Xavier Hawk, thank you for joining us. We really appreciate it. And Luke, thanks for introducing me to Xavier. As you know, we did sort of pre-interviews yesterday. All of you are very interesting and come from different backgrounds and life experiences. It's a neat to put you together in a group. Vinay, somebody saying that correctly. Vinay Gupta, very shy, very reticent, very kind of stuck in the shell, but I was able to elicit some thoughts from him. And eventually when he came out of the corner, no, I'm kidding. He's a madman. He's very expressive. He's done a lot. He has strong opinions. He expresses them strongly. I appreciate how he expresses them. He's not entirely unclose to the points of view of others, assuming that you've gone 10 rounds with him, as I think Luke and Xavier have. So for my own safety, I'm probably going to be stepping back from the fray at a certain point, and get out of the blast zone and just kind of watch, through robotic eyes at a distance. I don't even know, I'm improvising here. But Vinay, I couldn't do you all justice like you could do you justice. So Luke, who the hell are you? Tell us.
Thanks so much for having me, Gordon. I'm really excited about this. It's kind of a fun idea because as I mentioned yesterday, I think I've been toying with the idea of doing some type of podcast show. I have a lot of people ask me, hey, when are you going to do a show? And I started thinking about, who are the multi-dimensional thinker type people that I would have on a show if I was to do one. And Xavier and Vinay are two of the people that I absolutely enjoy having deep conversations with. So as far as who I am, I'm a father, a husband. I've got 3 kids. I live in Puerto Rico. I'm very passionate about the cryptocurrency space. I've got a major in computer science. So I have a technical background. Ran an e-commerce company for about 10 years. Tried to get people in 2013 to use cryptocurrency via that e-commerce company. Everyone agreed it was too hard and they didn't care. So my message that crypto is going to change the world and be more disruptive than the internet kind of was less interesting back then. But as it's kind of inevitably unwinding itself, I'm more and more convinced that this is part of the future, this self-sovereign money concept. Mm-hmm. And so I've been involved in various projects. I was a block producer on the Steam blockchain, which is now the Hive blockchain. Also a block producer on EOS with EOS DAC, very passionate about DACs and DAOs, decentralized autonomous communities and mechanisms for better human governance so we can actually not destroy ourselves, hopefully. And I'm very passionate about making cryptocurrency easier to use, all these projects easier to use. So my current title, if I have to claim one, is Managing Director for the Foundation for Interwallet Operability. And we're really just, that is our goal, make cryptocurrency easier to use, human readable names.
So down and repeat that one, because that's, you got the nice big FIO logo floating by your head. Talk about that for a second. And yes, you're virtually on that side. So say it slowly and say what it is.
The Foundation for Interwallet Operability is an open source protocol. It's a usability layer for all wallets, exchanges, payment gateways, basically anything in the entire cryptocurrency space, making all the coins, all the tokens, all the chains easier to use. And it doesn't integrate with the chain itself. It's a wallet layer solution. So it's like a usability experience. And it offers basically 3 main things. It's not just wallet naming like ENS or Unstoppable. But it does have that. So I have Luke Stokes as a human readable name for all of my cryptocurrency.
Right.
But in addition, you can have a request for funds. So you can have like an order card or an invoice, and you can have metadata about that transaction. So it's a really important way to make cryptocurrency as easy as PayPal, Venmo, any of the centralized systems people are used to, but it's still being done in a private, decentralized, secure, and really self-sovereign way. So you get to control the mappings to your different cryptocurrency addresses. We have improvements coming that will allow for friending, so you can have complete secrecy between the 2 groups. Even metadata about the fact that 2 individuals interacted would be hidden with the future improvements we have coming. So it's a really great solution where you can have the decentralized dream that we want with those who are advocates of cryptocurrency without sacrificing usability. And I think these are the things required in order to reach mass adoption. And I do think mass adoption is inevitable. It's just being hindered by how freaking hard everything is to use,
Mm-hmm. Got it. Very good. I like it. Xavier.
Good morning.
Yeah.
My name is Xavier Hawk, and I started a home health agency with my family in 2001. Basically semi-retired when I was in my late 20s, bought a farm and built a off-grid community where we taught homesteading, survival, and we had like we had people showing up for workshops. We did a YouTube channel for that with homesteading under 60 seconds. It's still out there. And then while I was building that neighborhood, it was essentially built around the idea of food security and power security and signal security. And I was like, I needed a token or a tradable instrument to stay out of the Federal Reserve System. And this was circa 2010 to 2013, basically. And Bitcoin came on the scene and I was like, whoa, this is the thing. And then when I looked at the underlying architecture of it, I was like, this is really the thing, not just for currency and transactions, but for also governance, for IDs, for all sorts of really important stuff. And so at that time, I set out an architecture for a basket asset-backed cryptocurrency, and I was the first to offer that necessarily to the community. That was prior to blockchain capital and Tether and all of this, along with the chief architect of the Euro, Bernd Lapp, and then became the first guy to negotiate a blockchain for a sovereign nation in 2014. From there, I've learned a lot about how the whole system really works from global governance and all of this, and designed essentially like a human resource management tool, like something that could be used to manage a homeowners association, a condo association, a municipality, or an entire nation. And that has led me down some really interesting rabbit holes, and we've got what we believe to be the reputation system that would be, not Black Mirror.
Not Black Mirror.
Not Black Mirror, and our company.
There were some cool episodes of Black Mirror. I don't know. I mean,
well, there's this one episode where they have a reputation system, and it's like
I know,
right?
Yeah,
and
that's what you call the
Nosedive, I think it was.
or something. Nosedive, not
Nosedive.
Yeah,
There's also
it was the
San
only
Junipero,
episode.
which is if you're dead, you can still have a last-minute love affair with your forbidden, object of desire.
Not familiar. I'm only familiar with that one episode because somebody was like, "This is what you're building," and I gave a talk in Hong Kong in 2015 or 14. And little did I know it was to the room full of the little CCP agents who built their social credit system, and I was basically outlining how you build a social merit system so that it becomes fair and equitable. I didn't realize what it would turn into. So.
I wasn't sure that was the go-to topic. I'm glad it is because it relates to our general topic of identity and reputation.
Yeah, we can get there, but I want to let Vinay introduce himself. So, our company name is Phireon, PHIREON.com, PHIREON, based on the Phi golden ratio, and we use that for our consensus model.
Fantastic. And Vinay, I will now pronounce your name correctly. Excuse me, I was going off at phonetically.
There is no correct pronunciation. Vinay, Scottish Indians will say Vinay, South Indians will say Binoy. That really doesn't matter.
I want to keep it real and call you Binoy. I'm down.
No, I'm Scottish, for God's sakes.
Okay, whatever. I can't wait to hear. Vinay, okay. Come on, drop the bombs on us. Who the hell are you and why are you so shy?
So let's see, I'm a graphics programmer by trade. So I spent my 90s in video games and flight sims, medical imaging, then spent a lot of time on the web. After 9/11, I moved into energy policy and then defense think tanks. Invented a thing called the Hexier, which they now build thousands of every year at Burning Man. It's an emergency shelter that you can it's open source, it's public domain. You just download the plans, buy a bunch of bits and pieces from Home Depot, and you can go out there and build housing. And thousands of people do. And then I kind of got sick of the defense world 2014 and walked back across the aisle, joined the Ethereum team, project managed the launch, did a bunch of the early comms, and then struck out a couple of years ago to build a digital identity layer for physical things. So right now, it's just very hard inside of the blockchain to reach out and touch the real world. Mm-hmm. If you want to sell your car, sell your house, sell a gold bar, sell 2% of the wine production from a vineyard or something, just identifying physical goods in a way that is usable on chain is very difficult. So we have a set of machinery for doing that called Materium. And we've launched a proof of concept product earlier this year. So if you go to materium.com/about, you've got MetaMask installed, you can play with some objects, you can sign some contracts for proofs. And our first customer is William Shatner of all things, because Star Trek is the
I
way
saw that. That was cool.
Yeah, Shatner is.
I was like, how did you get Shatner?
Shatner got us. One does not get Shatner, one gets got by Shatner.
That's almost Chuck Norris level. Okay.
Oh yeah. I mean, so he went to the Satoshi Roundtable, right? And I went with him and Paul Camuso, who is the CEO of the kind of joint venture thing that we're doing with Shatner. And Shatner in like a room full of 200 crypto people, you have never seen a smoother operator.
Yeah.
I can believe that. Look, anyone who can sing Starman and not sound completely ridiculous is my hero. So
no, it was legit. I was there. I got to Vinay introduced us. I got to chat with him a little bit. It was really neat to see a bunch of nerds geek out about like the coolest nerd.
I mean, did he go like, Vinay, we must rescue crypto?
Weirdly enough, no, but I had one very notable conversation with him where he was grilling me about whether or not you could use your crypto keys inside of secure messaging applications to encrypt your messages. And I'm like, you're 87 years old and you're grilling me about crypto key intercompatibility? Like, whoa.
Right.
Because it just turns out that he's had like 100% access to the nerd universe, for 50 years. So he's used to being able to ask hard questions and get good answers. Fair enough.
There you go.
It's like the shepherd walks by your tent, and then you realize it's the Messiah. It's like, wow. It's like crazy. I'm sorry, I know that's like a weird reference, but it's like, I had a certain image of him, which is already God. And then for him to be like, you know, what's above that? It's like,
Well, the answer is obviously William Shatner.
You know what? Hold on. Here's to you. That was a good answer. All right, go on, please.
I think that's about it. I mean, you know,
That's not it. Okay, hold on.
Really?
No, that's not it. Okay, for everyone in the audience, you know, you're being surprisingly reticent and shy. Okay, first of all, hexayard. Let's just kind of roll back there. Okay.
Yeah, sure.
Would you say that to be good in a nuclear disaster to house families and, you know, keep everyone in decent shape?
Well, I mean, okay, so the hexayard's designed so you can basically take stuff right out of the industrial supply chain and immediately convert it into shelter without too much intermediate screwing around. So you can build a hexayard with no tooling but a craft knife out of those big insulation foam boards that they sell in Home Depot for insulating like garages. And it'll cost you a few $100s, and it'll take you a couple of hours of labor, but then you have a building which will stand for months or years, and it's fully insulated. It's like living inside of a cooler. Because, you know, it's made out of, you know, inch thick to inch thick foam. So these things are, you know, basically, if you've got to rehouse hundreds of thousands or millions of people in an area that's already got a pretty decent supply chain, they're your best bet by a long country mile, because you could go into production immediately. The planning work that I did around that basically involved the Corps of Engineers retrofitting Home Depot stores as hexayard production facilities. And they've already got all the tooling. They've already got all the table saws. If you want to make them out of wood, they've got all the material supply chains. And, you know, you can rehouse millions of people inside of a few weeks on that kind of template.
You can also build modular housing that is actually very insulated and cost efficient.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it all comes down to what you've got in terms of time and resources. The hexayard is basically what you do instead of tents rather than what you do instead of houses. Although you can spray them with concrete and turn them into permanent domes, which is quite nice. They're zero waste. The other thing about them is, like, and this is kind of hard to describe, but like, if you have to rehouse tens of millions of people because you've got like large scale systemic failure. So suppose that, you know, the November situation goes south and then somebody takes out the US electrical grid, right? You know, cyber attack, this kind of thing.
Yeah.
You got to rehouse basically everybody that lives in an area that gets 10 below freezing. You know, these people have to go south, and you've got to rehouse entire nations. And the hexayard was intended for rehousing hundreds of millions of climate refugees. So we have the material in the industrial supply chain to build entire cities in a matter of 2 or 3 months, like entire cities, soup to nuts, right? Housing, sanitation, lighting, power, transport, the whole thing. We have the technology, and it can be done for a few $100 a family. Now you might say, well, you know, what kind of thinking would lead you to design something like that? And my answer was climate change, but actually civil war will do it as well.
Yeah, civil war can be useful. And then I got to go down this route because I'm in this whole life, you know, yes, I'm an attorney. I'm in this whole licensing world. How did you defensively, I know this has nothing to do with our topic, but I just don't care because, you know what, I got a microphone. How did you defensively protect the intellectual property that was associated with hexayard? This is fascinating to me.
So our objective for the hexayard was not to build a hexayard company, patent the hell out of it, and make hexayards. Because the history of patent shelters is almost all patent shelters fail. There's a 50-60 year history of people figuring out some cool way of doing houses. They take out a patent, they produce a few thousand units over 5 years, then they run out of money. And this is an endless cycle of this. So I decided that we wanted to try and get not one company manufacturing hexayards, but 500 companies, right? Come into existence, build a few, go out of existence, make some innovations, whatever it was. So I wanted something that was infinitely flexible in terms of IP. And for that goal, the best intellectual property is no intellectual property. So for physical objects, copyright doesn't apply, patent applies, trademark applies, and design registration applies.
Right.
So we didn't take out a patent, and to stop other people taking out patents, we published a huge amount of material on every topic that we could think of to make it harder and harder and harder for somebody to take out a patent on a hexayard and say that they'd made an innovation. So we just want to
just be clear, the requirement for patentability is novelty. Like the prior art cannot be so close to what you're coming up with that you're just basically repeating what's already been done. So by your defensively publishing all this, and I think you mentioned IBM follows the same strategy, which was news to me and I thought was fascinating. You essentially public domain to this knowledge without having to wait for the patent or the copyright to expire, which I think is genius. And you know, it's maybe not your idea, but it's genius, and you did it actually.
Oh yeah, and it's cheap, right? I mean, defensive publication is you get together with a bunch of mates and you brainstorm about all the crazy things you could do one day, and then you write all of it down, and you stick it somewhere public.
Right.
And at that point, defensive publication is achieved, right? You go to the Hexert webpage. Here's a page that says R&D agenda. Here's 58 million things that we think we might do one day, and that's all territory that nobody will ever patent out from under us. And there are 6 or 8 companies in California that manufacture them for Burning Man, and those companies are growing. And you know, eventually, well, and one of them's already got a sort of Hexert-derived shelter called a shift pod in the into refugee camps. They've gotten a small number of them into live camps.
Yeah, I even worked with a company in North Carolina to start manufacturing SIP panel Hexa homes, and I had hexahome.com.
Sorry, Xavier, SIP panel, what does that mean?
Insulated panel. They're already built. They just come and you just stick them together with like latches. So it's like it's like a Lego home essentially.
Okay, so we're totally changing the topic of the show. No, just kidding. Okay.
No. I mean,
that was my fault, but it's so interesting. I'm into it. But okay, so
but what is crypto for? If you're trying to go back in the woods, live in a Hexert with a big kind of Starlink dish on your roof.
That's what we were doing.
Over your knee and a couple of dogs under the porch. Right?
Yeah,
I mean, is that not what we all want?
Yeah, we had the cost of a house down to like $15,000, including DC insulated, DC power, and all the amenities, but basically like an RV version of a home.
Luke, are you an off-the-grid type, or is that workable?
You know, I would like to be. I also understand the maxim that I enjoy in my life, which is happy wife, happy life. She is a big part of my existence. And so she's like, no, we're not going to live that way. You know, I took her to the Freedom Festival, the Porcupine Freedom Festival one time, Pork Fest, and it's a week-long camping. And she was like, and we used to camp a lot, but she was just like,
Like, are we refugees now?
Yeah, you know, it's like I'm asking my wife to join in also. She likes hotels. Okay, she likes hotels in like Swiss Alps with like views and elevators and stuff. And
so the key is we're gonna have it be super luxurious. You know, it's gonna be off-grid. That's just amazing, and that's gonna be the key. So
it'll be a fire on neighborhood. You'll see.
Okay, I like how this is all coming together. It works.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna try to recover from my.
I know we need a moderator. What the heck, Gordon? Come on.
I know I shouldn't really be in the conversation, right? Okay, so we when Luke and I were talking, the discussion topic that we decided to at least start with is identity and reputation, and is it the blockchain's killer app or just the killer? Because these fine gentlemen have strong and diverse opinions, and yet they haven't killed each other. And this is something we're speaking about because we're seeing identity and reputation. Reputation has been around forever. We all have identities, we all have our names, but in this technologically enabled world, it has, like everything else, it holds a lot of promise for good and for evil. And some people would say just good, some people would say I don't know if anyone would say just good. Some people would say just evil. And I just want to lay that context. Identity and reputation, what does it look like in this new world? And how's it going to play out? And Luke, I'm going to dub you Sir Co-moderator.
All right. No, I'll take it. Can
you frame this inquiry?
Yeah. Let me unpack it. So a couple years ago, I did a post about like freedom. It was like about freedom, identity, human flourishing, the juxtaposition of privacy and security, and the need for radical transparency. And when I say radical transparency, I'm thinking in terms of, imagine there is no government. Imagine all human interactions are essentially voluntary, and you still need a mechanism to know who you're dealing with in a business transaction, in a relational community. How do you know that someone is trustworthy without being able to identify them in some way and then start building reputation? And this goes back to what we've studied on game theory and reproducible game interactions, where essentially tit for tat with forgiveness, this mechanism where, as we cooperate as a species, we do really well. Some would argue it's one of the reasons this species has dominated the planet. And we do that through the ability to have tribal and connectional relationships with each other, which is fundamentally, in my perspective, based on identity and reputation. So essentially, as our lives become digitized, as we do more and more and more of our normal human species type interaction through ones and zeros and through our internet connections, we have to think about what is the digital representation of our analog selves, and that includes reputation and identity. And so I kind of feel like it's inevitable. And we referenced earlier, you know, the Black Mirror episode. I referenced that in my post. Actually, it was around the same time that episode came out. And I understand that it's horrifically dangerous to get this wrong. I mean, you could seriously destroy someone's ability to be human and interact with the world if their entire existence is connected to online and they have an immutable reputation that they do not control. And they have an immutable identity that can't be reset. I mean, these are very, very dangerous things. I'm a father of 3. I'm very concerned about this. And it's something that I have had very amazing, deep conversations with people like Vinay and Xavier, and I talked about it as well. Vinay and I met at Burning Man actually first originally, and we were since at multiple conferences deep diving into this. And you know, and I'll bounce ideas off of people like Brock Pierce too, and I'll say, what do you think about this? Well, here's what Vinay thinks, and here's what, and I've had amazing conversations with some of our audience here, like Wulf and Marco, and so it's like really something that keeps coming up in my life. It keeps coming up as an important thing we have to figure out. And it also relates to what I'm doing right now with FIO. We would love, we have 125 million tokens set aside for FIO address giveaways. We want to give everybody FIO addresses, but we can't do that accurately and effectively without some type of Sybil attack resistance. And a Sybil attack is where one person pretends to be a whole bunch of people. So we have to have a mechanism to say, you and only you are a human, and then we can give you something and you only get it once, right? This is essentially what we'd like to be able to accomplish. And that's very, very difficult without some kind of trusted identity and reputation system. But before I just willy-nilly, you know, guns blazing, go rolling out some new solution to the world about identity and reputation and how it relates to FIO, and because these are identifiable names, you know, I want to talk to some incredible experts. So basically, this is my excuse to force some of these people to talk about their passions by bringing them onto your show. So that's kind of how we got where we are today. And I'm super excited about this debate because I think it'll be lively. I think Xavier and Vinay have some deep experience in this, where I'm just kind of the new guy who has to solve some problems. And I want to do it in a way that doesn't harm anybody.
I thoroughly endorse your idea of starting a podcast. You're very good. So excellent. Thank you for unpacking. Well done. I will, everyone will be your audience member and everyone will be your supporter. So good job.
Right, I love it. All right,
co-host. Go,
let's start with
your guests.
I'd love to unpack Xavier, unpack a little bit more about, like, because I want to even poke holes at potentially. You know, you mentioned to me that you had this experience talking to people in China that eventually, like from your perspective, turned into this dystopian nightmare. Like you can't even get on a plane unless you love your dear leader correctly and, you know, honor the government, right? This violent, you know, potentially government. So unpack that experience. You know, is that just your own hubris? How do you know that you actually impacted that process, and what did you learn from it?
So 2 things. They came up to me afterwards and asked me a whole bunch of poignant questions and said, we're working on a reputation system for the Chinese government. And I was like, oh, that's very interesting. I'm probably not going to speak with you anymore. What had happened was I was so excited about reputation. I was so excited about a social merit system, a meritocracy, right? Not a top-down controlled corporatocracy or even tyranny, right? But a meritocracy whereby we are able to gauge our own worth and value in a system measured by and countered by those who are in our friend circle, right? So on LinkedIn, you can say, oh, so-and-so is good at this, I vouch for him. But it's like, who vouches for you? Who vouches for you? Well, what we have to do is we have to create reputation systems where the circle of friends that you have, it costs you to have a circle of friends, right? So you can't just add 10,000 people as your friend circle. They get to answer questions about you. So your score against their score creates your score, right? So in that, there's no immutability like you had described in terms of this is your score and that's it, and now you can't get on a plane because everybody thinks you're a douchebag. You have to actually, it costs you to take somebody else's score down. Let's say, like after the course of events, let's say you're a homeowner association manager and you have a sphere of influence on 100 people who live in your homeowners association. Your choices affect them in the same way that a congressman or homeowners association person now, but there's no recourse there. So what you have to do is you have to create systems that allow you to change that immutability and have it be like self-directed. Let's say you live in a community that values permaculture and not monoculture. But there is a community that values monoculture. Within your sphere of influence, within your sphere of activity, let's say, those ratings change based upon the values of those people there. This is one of Elinor Ostrom's like key 8 principles of the managing the commons. So it has to be something that they can do and manage themselves with, try it out, but within a system of management that allows interoperability, let's say, between the community and the larger municipality that they're within. So what happened for me was like, I'm building this to say, like, this is the system that will allow us to move efficiently as humans and meet all of your requirements in terms of moving digitally and how you can know people. But my experience with the CCP was that, and that was, by the way, the last time I actually spoke about these kinds of systems, because I didn't realize what kind of effect being able to put new concepts into the new sphere, and that there are a lot of other clever, there are a lot of other clever people who are looking at how to do this. And yeah, there's a bit of hubris on my side because I feel like I'm going to do it the best out of anybody. No disrespect to the beautiful people here, but so there's that hubris, of course. But I think Gordon and I talked yesterday on our pre-show about the difference between ego and that arguably is the thing that allows human civilization to develop. You have to have that kind of hubris and to actually move the system forward. So I think that
we got a whole Ayn Rand discussion and whether the ego is the fountain head of all human achievement or whether it's the death of humanity.
Yeah. And I tend to think, and here's more of that hubris, Luke, is that I don't think anybody has thought well enough or long enough about, from like a 10,000 year perspective on this to build it as well. And I'm scared, based upon my CCP experience, to contribute to others who I find to be morally flexible, whereas I have no other goal than to create a system that allows humanity to be free and more efficient in its soul development, let's say.
Awesome. I love being able to, I poke at you when I say hubris because I know you'll give a fun reply. But yeah, I think that is ultimately the gist of the conversation that I'd love to catch on today is like, we understand the power of this. I think, none of us have to be convinced that this is a tool that will be used like a brick to either build a house or break a window. It is something that could be extremely dangerous. People talk about the handgun as extremely dangerous and, oh my gosh, we need to ban the handguns. But at the same time, a handgun was an equalizer for a small, unpowerful person to be able to stand up against an oppressor. So it's very interesting, these challenging forces that we have created, these technological things that we can't put back in Pandora's box. It's going to happen. It's going to happen. And
it's already happened.
Vinay, when I say, we got to spend some time talking about this. We got to research this. We got to, have open conversations. And I had I was trying to connect some people with Vinay and also Ian Grigg and some others. And it was kind of like, hell no, don't even touch it. You're too good of a person to even pretend that this is something you even want to touch. It's bad. So Vinay, give us the reason why this is so dangerous and so bad.
Okay, so, let's put this in context, right? We've got your experience with the CCP, right? Like, okay, I think we can agree no good is going to come of that. But, like the Holocaust, there's this lovely little book called IBM and the Holocaust. And the question of the Holocaust was, how did they get the names? How did they know who was Jewish and who wasn't? And the answer is punched card machines that they bought from IBM. Right? You have a little algorithm for figuring out from the genealogical database who's descended from a Jew down the matrilineal line, or who is descended from Jews down the patrilineal line, and then you just rank them in order of priority and send out the Gestapo to go pick them up.
It wasn't just the mobs, by the way. And the Jewish, just for better or for worse, Nuremberg laws did not restrict it to if your mother is Jewish. It was just everyone. They didn't respect our nice Torah that way.
Oh, you see, right? Because you wouldn't really expect the Nazis. But the story about Albert Speer was they came to Speer and said, like, we want you to do a bunch of stuff for us. And Speer said, I'm Jewish, and they said, we decide who is a Jew.
That wasn't Albert Speer. I know who you're talking about it. So Goering, no, it wasn't.
Speer.
No, one of Goering's underlings, was partly Jewish, and this is someone who served in World War I. And then the head of the Gestapo went to him and reported him as a Jew. And Goering said, I decide who's the Jew. Trust me, Spear was not Jewish.
So, okay, not Spear. I'm thinking, well, anyway,
I know what you mean, but I just got to throw it out. Robert Spear's kind of an amazing person, and I've read his biography, but trust me, not Jewish.
Not Jewish.
No.
So, we've already seen this go hideously wrong in a way that killed 20 million people, right? The Jews, the Gypsies, the homosexuals, the communists, the Freemasons,
yeah,
right? The Nazis took out a big chunk of the German population and their neighbors and killed them, and that whole project was organized with computers. The tattoos with the numbers, right? Yep. These archetypal symbols of the Holocaust, those things are punched card numbers. They're index numbers on a fucking database.
Yep.
Right? Why would we ever step a quarter of a millimeter in that direction again? Are we fucking crazy? Do we not learn from history?
Well, I would say that, yeah, we don't. In fact, that the majority of military operations and intelligence programs that are going quantum and all of these other these very advanced technologies, which are rightly kept in black scenarios so that they don't reach the mass population because they're very dangerous, right? And to talk about, again, about hubris, the hubris of the human species is such that they will, there's a great meme that's out there about Star Trek, interestingly enough, like the Klingons come to the Vulcans and they're like, why did you give them warp technology? The humans, they're crazy. They'll do anything with it. They're like, well, they strapped 5 of them together and blew through another dimension, and they lived so short, they're crazy. So of course we're going to give them this technology and see what they do with it, right? So I
don't know if we went Shatner, Black Mirror, Star Trek, it's all kind of going super nerd.
Oh, yeah. Science fiction is the only way to reason about these kind of futures, right?
Exactly.
The problem is it gets outdated so quickly because the current things are moving so fast. It's like, what the hell?
Well,
I want my Blade Runner future.
Is that cypherpunk determines the future. If you want to understand today, and Vinay, you've talked about this and others have talked about this, and I did a thing on this as well. Go back and read the cypherpunk of the past, and you'll be a description of today. A straight
Necronomicon, freaking awesome, and the manifesto.
No, you're thinking Cryptonomicon.
Cryptonomicon.
Sorry, Necronomicon would be Ash and the Evil Dead, right?
That's my other life. So. I bought my copy of Cryptonomicon for 7 grams of digital gold.
Wow.
And at the end of that period, I was basically changing careers and moved across country to get away from the people I was working for, who I strongly began to suspect were actually mafia, right? Doing research into crypto financial instruments in 99, 2000. Yeah. Never proved anything, never got to the bottom of the mystery, but I got the hell out of town before I found out something I didn't want to know.
So these things are being built. It's for me, it feels like we need to build it before they do, in the sense that we need to build an island of freedom in a sea of, dystopia. So
I agree with the island of freedom. I just don't think that reputation systems have any role in islands of freedom, right? And the kind of thinking that leads to that conclusion is built on a couple of very, very shaky premises, right? So, my approach to this is that what we really want from our interactions with people is certainty of restitution. If somebody screws us over, we want to get our money back. Right. And as long as we have certainty of restitution, we don't really need identity for almost anything, right? You might need identity for poker games, you might need identity for auctions, but if I've got certainty of restitution, I can give you a bank loan and I don't even need to know your name. Okay, if I'm 100% sure that if you don't give me the money back, somebody else will, you walk up to me with an insurance policy from Lloyd's that says, right, if this person does not give you the money back on time, we will give you the money back. At that point, I'm willing to hand over the money as long as I know that the Lloyd's contract is really from Lloyd's. I don't care who you are.
Okay, here's my issue with that, and you brought this up yesterday, and don't bite my head. Do whatever you want. I don't care. I don't necessarily have time to waste to hire someone, think I'll have restitution, have him screw up and get paid in restitution. What if I don't want to F around? What if I just want it done right and reputation is provide some data that this person may be better than that person?
Or like a business relationship, and it doesn't have to do with money. Like, I just don't want to work with a douchebag or somebody who's a horrible person to cats, like whatever it might be.
Yeah, seriously, I got two cats.
Or Jewish or black or a Scientologist or whatever it happens to be, right? If you create the machinery that permits discrimination, people will abuse it. Don't create the machinery that permits discrimination. Blind transactions. You don't have any business knowing what somebody's, age, gender, race, religion, or anything the rest of that stuff is if you're just going to sell them goods over the internet. That information is none of your goddamn business.
The challenge I have with that is that just as you want to protect those who can't protect themselves with, keeping them anonymous, and again, this is why I think privacy and security and deep, strong encryption is so incredibly important, especially if you're someone who lives in a totalitarian state where any misstep means they can disconnect you from your livelihood and ability to provide for your family. But the opposite is also true. Meaning not every, like Xavier was talking about, not every interaction is financial. I can't put a financial bond on the value of my relational connection to the people in my community as far as, how we treat each other, how we treat the earth, there's certain things that are just not transactional in a financial way. So I need a memory system. And this is, again, I think back to our tribal nature. I need a way to keep track of who is that person to me. It's very contextual to the point of what was meant in what's that?
Isn't that called your brain?
It is up to 150 people, though. The Dunbar number of and 150 is maybe generous. It's like it depends on your capacity for adding resources to that part of your daily existence. As we were talking about earlier, I think everything will become digitized, including my CRM, my mechanism for keeping track of my relational management of connections with people. And I have to remember, wait, was that guy harmful to the people I love? Or was that person, caring and loving? And can I trust them with some money to go distribute it and add value to the world? Like even investors.
Well, hang on. So there it became transactional again. Can I trust them with the money? Now we're talking restitution again.
In that example, yes. But can I trust them to watch my kids? That's not transactional. That has nothing to do with money. They're worth more than all money. So there are mechanisms.
But you're going to trust. Wait. But you're going to trust some random piece of software to tell you whether or not you can trust somebody with your kids?
Absolutely not.
What
I would trust is a self-sovereign, immutable system that I have complete control over, like a blockchain, a Byzantine fault-tolerant system that I can trust beyond anything else that I have on my computer today, even something that is, has distributed, provable cryptographic security to say I can put data in there that only I can retrieve.
But all that system does is move lies around, right? Or
if they're lies, then they're lies that I put. This is the self-sovereign nature and the importance of systems, right?
But what you're talking about here is basically a notebook in which you write what you think about people, right? We don't need a blockchain for that. It's called a file. Right? You can do that on a piece of paper. You can do it in a little black book, right? It's not any kind of transferable credential, right? The problem with all of these systems, when we get right down to it, is that if you build a system for rating people, people will rate each other based on what's important to them, and many people are monsters, right? So as soon as we build a rating system to allow people to rate each other, you bet that whoever the outgroup is locally is going to get shafted, right? The blacks, the Jews, the gay people, the Scientologists, the fundamentalist Christians, the snake-handling Baptists, whoever it is that the local people are uncomfortable with.
I was about to say, can you imagine one person who's all those things?
I'm gonna very quickly hop over that because that's a rabbit hole which is very funny and very politically incorrect. But there is a game called Entitlement Bingo where everybody goes around trying to name the person they know who has most entitlements, and I have a friend that allows me to win every single round. Before the motorcycle accident, she would occasionally lose, but after the motorcycle accident, she's 100% winner. Anyway, bad joke. So, getting back to the point here. In the areas where we've got the possibility of restitution-based economies, you can have restitution plus history. Right? But the history, and this is extremely important, should be based on fact rather than opinion. So if we have a history where somebody screws something up and a restitution payment is made, the fact that that restitution payment was made is materially significant.
And it erases that the negative score, let's say, of that previous thing that they did wrong. They didn't get you the money.
But the fact that they screwed up and they fixed it, we should write that down, right?
Yeah.
Right. Restitution payment. How many? This person has had 4 restitution payments made in the past. and you might be able to investigate the circumstances of those, like, oh, they were fixing somebody's roof and they parked their car on the lawn. Okay, fine, it cost $200 to fix, whatever it was, right? Where we run into trouble is where we start allowing people to prejudge people based on third-party perspectives, right? Bob says that Harry is a bad person, so Jim won't hire him for a job, right? This is blackballing, right? This is blacklisting.
That's Black Mirror. That's Black
Right?
Mirror.
This
That's
is,
that episode.
This is all of that stuff. So building a reputation system that doesn't allow people to discriminate against each other based on third parties is going to cause like massive chaos. Right?
Yeah. Well, that's assuming that system would do that. That's what we're talking about here in reputation. Whereas if you want to build an actual meritocracy, you need to know an individual's capacity and value to the system that they're in, right? So you need to be able to look up at somebody, say, I need somebody who can build train tracks, right? And so you need to be able to look through the system and find somebody who's got that skill set and know that they are truly able to build train tracks, and not that their friend Joe says that they're good at building train tracks. Like
so this is certification rather than maybe reputation.
Correct.
Right? Like, is my doctor a doctor? Yep.
Well, that's an interesting distinction. I don't know that I've actually gone there with the reputation discussion, that certification is somehow a specific category, but to me, it's the exact same thing, where certification is reputation by an authority. And I look at the reason I'm passionate about a decentralized self-sovereign solution to this problem is that the authorities have been time and time again become a central control mechanism that become the, Gestapo like you described. To me,
Dude.
It's not so much that they used punch cards, it's that you had very evil people that people were giving authority to. These are people that didn't have a value of human life, and they used their authority to dominate those around them. It's the authority problem, and this is discussed in anarchist and voluntarist circles quite a bit. It's the myth of authority, the belief that we can give someone rights over our own bodies and have that be over bodies of other people, and have that be in some way
or proxy them to make decisions for you. Right?
Yeah.
Instead of being educated on the topic itself. It's
so
the
the
same
challenge
thing
is
with guns, right? It's like a gun in the hand of a good man keeps everybody safe, where a gun in the hand of a bad man doesn't, right? What we have to do is we have to figure out a system that educates people to the logic of being good people, right? The reasoning why we all want to be better people, and not allow sociopaths to run. Because chlorine was a great solution for cleaning water and ended, dysentery and all of these other things. But then it becomes like fluoride or something. The solution becomes the problem after a course of time. So the game theory is like, how do we build a solution that does not become gamed until our intelligence and wisdom is able to come up with a new solution.
And with that too, it's very easy to just put things in big boxes and say good, bad, very cartoon-based morality. I know who the good guy is, I know who the bad guy is, and I can clearly make decisions. But the reality is much more nuanced than that and contextualized. Like the example that is interesting is the guy who created, I think it was the mustard gas, also invented the nitrogen-based fertilizer that prevented the Malthusian scare destruction of humanity. They're like, oh no, we're all going to die. We can't produce enough food for humanity. And all of a sudden we get nitrogen-based fertilizer, and they're like, oh, well, maybe not. I guess we'll be okay now. And the idea being, this was not a good person. Like there's evidence that he probably murdered his wife, and like there's some weird stuff there. And yet he was the guy that created this thing that we as a species needed. So I do appreciate, like, if you're going to go into battle, you almost kind of want the psychopath to lead that battle, right? Like you don't want, the nice person to be like, oh,
right.
We can all be friends. Like that's actually the dude who is probably, there's evolutionary stable strategies for why those people have continued to be part of our cooperative societies, right? Like, so I get that there are deep, important nuances to how we score people that are contextual. But I also think, again, this is inevitable. It's how humans interact, and humans are starting to interact online. You can't go back to a Luddite society and put technology back in a box. It's going to happen. And if we disagree about that, let's talk about that. But I feel like it's going to happen. And if it's going to happen,
wait.
We get some smart people talking about how to do it in a good way.
Something is going to happen, right?
Yeah.
But there is no good implementation of slavery.
Right.
Right? There's just no good implementation of slavery. And reputation systems, there's no good form of reputation, right? It doesn't matter how you spin it around. At the end of the day, party A judges Party B on behalf of Party C in a manner which is more or less unaccountable or more or less inaccurate. There's no way of doing this ethically, right? Like, good reputation is like saying ethical stealing. It just doesn't work.
All right. Well, let me give you an example.
I'm gonna have a Richard Stallman moment here, and I know this is being recorded, but whatever. There's no good implementation of slavery. Well, yes, with what we all think of, what we think about as Americans, that may be true. But prison systems, drafting, I mean, that's involuntary labor. You know, whether, I mean, is that not a form of slavery, and is that not in some ways necessary?
Well, prison labor.
No, simply someone being in prison. You have to be in this room. You have to have food then. You need to go do this. Forget banging on rocks. Is that not slavery?
So now we're in the domain of talking about necessary evil, right?
Okay.
How much necessary evil do we need in society? We admit that prison is a form of kidnapping, but the alternative is letting our mass murderers run free on the streets. Well, okay, so we're going to kidnap the mass murderers. We're going to verify we got the right guy in there. We're going to lock them up for a while, right? I mean, as long as we're willing to admit. So let me just.
Oh, okay. I don't. Sorry, I'm just going to. That's people will say, you know, murder is not the same thing as killing. Killing is murder is an illegal killing. Okay, kidnapping.
Okay.
Okay. So
so here we're getting into the theory of what makes the state, right? So Weber will say the state is the single entity with the monopoly on legitimate violence inside a given geography.
Okay.
Right.
Agreed.
Max Weber, big European theorist. I have a better definition of the state than Weber's, I believe, which is to say the state is any entity which has the ability to proactively or retroactively pardon criminal behavior. So if you look at a place like Gaza, nobody has a monopoly on violence in Gaza. There are a bunch of entities that all have state-like power. And what makes those entities state-like is that they respect each other enough that if you say to the Israelis, that guy is one of ours, you're going to leave him alone, and you're, let's say, Hamas, under certain circumstances, they will let him out of their, let him go. Right? Like, you've just caught the, son of one of our chiefs stealing a car, and you're going to let that guy go or there's going to be trouble. Well, that guy walks.
Mm-hmm.
So this notion that you can have multiple overlapping entities that wield state-like authority in a single geography, and that what makes the state is this ability to retroactively or proactively pardon. You pardon theft, you get tax collection. You pardon assault, you get police. You pardon murder, you get military. Right? These things are not decriminalized by the fact the state does them. They're just pardoned.
Okay,
right?
and you can extend that argument to blockchain. Can you extend that argument to identity and reputation? Part of motivating the state is this exercise of power. So
where we are at, right, is right now the state is compiling extraordinarily large databases on everybody, right? And the answer is not for the people to then start assembling extraordinarily large databases on themselves, right? The answer to the state has too much information about us is not that we then gather too much information about ourselves. This is just arse backward. The answer is, if the state is gathering too much information about us, we figure out how to stop the state doing that. And that could be partly legislative, it could be partly technical, it could be a question of getting down to this question of what is the information for, and then finding ways of doing trade that don't require the information. Like credit, right? Almost any transaction involving credit involves somebody doing credit rating, and the credit rating agencies are infinitely hungry for data. That's fine. We just moved to an economy where you can prepay for things and you don't need credit. Does that have some implications on people's liquidity? Sure. But if the choice is a little bit of liquidity for a ton of privacy, that's a trade we should make.
Well, it's a little bit more than liquidity. I mean, the thing that, if future value streams are going to be worth more than the present value, the thing that lets us access that and build is credit.
So credit, personal consumer credit, is the kind of thing where we need a ton of information about an individual.
Okay, I agree with the distinction between the business type investment credit and I'm buying a VCR. Anyone remember what a VCR is?
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, quite right. So I don't think businesses necessarily have a right to privacy, right? I mean, you could debate where the line is between what should or shouldn't be private for a business, but I think the caliber of corporate person doesn't necessarily have a right to privacy. Physical objects. I don't see why I shouldn't be able to say to the manufacturer of this here water thing, right? Here's my water bottle. If I want to know exactly what chemical that lid is made out of, I don't see why the manufacturer should be able to keep that a secret from me, right? Like, look, I'm drinking out of this container and it passes over this piece of plastic and I want to know exactly the chemical composition of that plastic. I really should have a right to know, because I don't see why their commercial secrecy should prohibit me from knowing what's going into my body, right? So I think that we can have radical transparency over corporations, and we can have radical transparency about the physical world, but I think we want radical privacy for individuals, because you can't trust anybody in the long run, and all of our encryption has a shelf life, right? You encrypt it right now, but 20 years from now, it will get walked through because computers will be faster and math will be better. So, at what point do we think we've got any secrecy? We've only got limited, all of our secrets are like time bombs, right?
Yeah.
Anything that was encrypted
totally.
put in a public place, tick, 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 and then one day it will be published because somebody will finally break the encryption. So, 20 years from now, all the data that we encrypt and lock on the blockchain will get opened up by political regimes that we can't even imagine.
Fair enough.
Right?
Now,
The only safe way of doing this
go ahead.
is not to record the data.
Well, I think it's really important to be able to have accountability in anybody who is representing a certain subset of people. Like, to use the homeowners association example from earlier, I run the homeowners association, and the decisions that I make affect all of the people in my community. They, just like the corporations who are accountable for what is in their ingredients or whatever, those people should also be accountable to those people with a high recourse, meaning in the early days of the United States Republic, you could recall your senator or congressman if they were doing a bad job. That was legal. You could go there and they would return, and if they didn't represent you properly, you get a muster up a little army of people and bring them back, even legally without an army. Then as things became federalized, you couldn't do that. In a system in a blockchain CRM or community management system, you can rate people, right? Like, let's say that homeowners association executive, everybody's like, oh, that guy sucks. He just decided to, have everybody's lawns painted purple or whatever. Then they could immediately recall them. And with a tokenized access token, essentially, that has like a smart contract built in, if their rating goes below a certain point, that token disappears. They can no longer access the functions of their job within the app. That immediately gives it a level of accountability that you don't have that misrepresentation at the governance level, both at the local level and at the larger level, because as your sphere of influence grows, the more people are able to rate you. So if you're doing a bad job, you lose your job immediately. But because we have immediacy of ones and zeros and can do asynchronous governance, we don't have to relegate it to every 4 years as the vote or whatever it is for recalling your senator. So the building a reputation system in terms of certification, in terms of accountability, I think is very important. Where we draw the distinction is like, you can't just dislike somebody and have their reputation score go down. It has to be based on an interaction or a transaction of some sort.
Mm-hmm. No, pause for a second. I just got to do one thing. Wulf Kaal, I'm bringing him into the conversation, my esteemed law professor colleague. Yeah, and just to really, really, really stir the pot here. So, Wulf, you asked for this, my friend. On you go.
Hey guys, I appreciate meeting you both. Vinay, your reputation precedes you. Xavier, we actually met in Davos 3 years ago. You still
I remember your face. Yeah,
hey,
that's right. I remember you.
Yes, good to see you. So I guess there are different ways to approach this. We could talk about the web of trust and why web of trust systems have many limitations that we haven't been able to overcome. We could talk about delineating the Chinese experience, and I actually have a chapter in my book on exactly delineating the Web3 approach to reputation systems from the Chinese experience and others. And we can very clearly delineate those, right? But maybe most importantly, we should talk about what is really needed in the digital asset space to create evolution, to propel us forward. And I would love to hear your take on how the space can evolve. In what ways? And I don't even want to tell you and preempt what you're saying by saying there's no way around reputation, right? I would just love to hear your thinking about what products are needed in order to move us forward, because we're kind of, in many ways, we're stuck. There's things that are being developed and other things that are not being developed that should be developed. And so maybe we should just have a conversation about how can we move forward?
I have been saying this from the beginning in the Bitcoin space, and there is no lifestyle product in the Bitcoin world. There's no app, there's no blockchain, there's no social media network. There is nothing that is really simple, easy to use for the people outside of the Bitcoin space. Ever since I've been in it, it's everybody circle jerking to themselves, all the other nerds, and not coming up with something that is like the iPhone or some kind of thing that goes in the hands of the people that they say, oh, now I get it, now I can use it, right? Very few people have the bandwidth or the time or the care to learn the systems that we've all taken part in learning. They just want the solution. They don't care how the car works. They just want to drive the car. They don't care how the television works. They just want to watch and lose themselves in the fantasy. So until that happens, we're going to see that. And I don't think that the systems have been built yet that are able to handle that yet. So it's almost like, what the demand is there. I mean, certainly nobody wants to be on Facebook or any of these other social media platforms, Twitter, whatever, because it's monolithically controlled by a few people who have their say on how and what gets said, right? There's no freedom of speech there. So everybody's looking for the alternative, and it can't be built unless these decentralized systems that Luke and Vinay and everybody here have been like hoping for. And the question is how to build the infrastructure and architecture to have that be the case. That'll be my piece on that.
So amazing conversation, guys.
James, introduce yourself. I muted you because you're an alumni speaker, but just give quick context on yourself before you go for the rest.
No problem. I was yelling at the screen the whole time, just like I do when Trump's on the screen. So no problem. So I'm James Haft. I run Pal Capital. Basically, been focusing on creating liquidity strategies for people, and community building strategies for people in the DLT space, with the belief that the community is really what's valuable, not the capital technology.
Ja, genau. Dann würde ich das der Agentur schon mal weitergeben. Das ist live.
Okay, I had to mute our good friend Bernd, but to be continued.
No problem. So basically, but when I was listening to the conversation, it's interesting. I think it's important to separate what someone is and what their heritage is and who they associate with is separate from what their actions are. Right? There's an old saying, you are what you do, right? Not what you say, and not where you were born. And so I think one of the confusion or conflation on this conversation has been about needing to know who someone is to do a transaction. And we know that one of the tenets of our new world is truth without trusting, right? We know what the truth is so we can go forward. So I think if we looked at reputation not as who I came from or even coming from other people, but instead an unfiltered data stream, which I could then make my own decision on how I want to deal with you, that would be more, then that would pull together the conversation earlier about avoiding prejudice, and then bringing in Wulf's idea, of needing a route forward. So I look for this, in this new world as a way. I want to know what people have done. I want to know, how they treated other people, and I want to see these things in objective ways, and I want to get rid of the filters, get rid of the centralization, and be able to make my own decisions, and be ruled by the fact that other people will know how I've acted, and therefore that's the guide for me to act properly, because I want other people to deal with me in a way that I want to do with them. So do unto others as you'd have them do to you. That's my input into what I've heard so far. And I've loved the conversation, guys. Thank you.
I'd like to comment on that a little bit, because I've kind of been experiencing this for the last 4 years on the Steam and now the Hive blockchain, where I can put my thoughts, I can blog immutably in a place that no one can modify it, no one can change it. I control the content. And I've gotten jobs, and I got hired by EOStack, for example, and they were like, we know everything about you. We've read everything you've ever posted. This isn't an interview of you. This is an interview of us. We want to know if you want to work with us. And it was a really interesting experience. And it reminded me from the Ray Dalio perspective of radical transparency. If you're doing great things in the world, you want a meritocracy. You want people to say, hey, judge me by the things I've accomplished, and then you decide whether that's valuable. And I think what's important about that is it also opens the door to the unbanked who don't have, you know, a passport, they don't have a utility bill, they don't have some government document that proves that they're a legitimate human with some form of, you know, what they've accomplished in the world. They're just out there with nothing. And to your point, Xavier, I think we do need to make crypto easier. This is why I'm passionate about FIO and projects like it, because we have to get into the hands of people the ability to access the financial world. There are billions of people who are looking for some tool to enable them to say, hey, I can go build that website for you. I can go do that community management for you. I can go do, you know, I can add value. I can do translations. I can do certain things. And then when someone reaches out to me on Telegram and says, hey, I'd like to help in this way, they're a nobody as far as I'm concerned. So I have to start building rapport with them. I have to connect with them. I have to have some understanding of relationship. And it's done, and this is my perspective on this. We are a social communal species. As much as we'd like to pretend that we're individual islands and we make all of our decisions based on our individual interactions, the reality is when I say, hey, Vinay, do you want to come on the show? Xavier's going to be on too. Vinay's like, oh, Xavier's awesome, right? And the reality is Gordon says, okay, I maybe don't know Xavier or Vinay, but I know Luke. And Luke says Xavier and Vinay are going to be a great show. So let's bring them on. And so
that's
there's
not quite what you said. You said they're freaking insane.
Species of people that know each other, connect to each other, talk to each other. Yes, it should be filtered by our individual context. What some person thinks is a monster, another person is a savior. But it's like, it's inevitable.
Should it be digitized and machine readable? Or is that just us painting enormous targets on our backs? Right? And this is not a neutral discussion, right? Like, you know, remember Ferguson? You know, there was a whole bunch of protests and police and mayhem and all the rest of that about 4 or 5 years ago. So it looks like somebody's been going around Ferguson and shooting the people that were involved in that protest. They've had 5 or 6 deaths, people burned in their cars, right? And somebody's just going around hoovering up those people so they don't cause trouble in future, right? And that's seriously Gestapo shit, and that's happening in America right now. So if you take our, you know, Black Lives Matter protesters and, you know, you give them some kind of reputation engine so that they can rate each other and you know who you can trust and all the rest of that, and, you know, it's great because it helps us organize protests really easily. All of that information then goes right into a federal database when the cryptography is cracked. And that trust network that you built up that tells you who the good actors and the bad actors are is used to prioritize who you're going to then go shoot in the back of the head.
Yes,
right?
and there's a fellow on here who I had a great conversation with yesterday, Marco, and the ideal system like this would have to be one whereby the central organizing authority did not know what relationships were, meaning that if I was like, they could only see my ID. They could see that I was a system owner, or, you know, part of the ownership of the company. But my bank account is on a separate chain, which has its own cryptography. My medical data, my HIPAA data, has its own cryptography. It's on its own chain.
Sure.
All of these other things.
All of that cryptography only buys you 20 years of privacy because that's about how long crypto algorithms are stable for.
Correct, but
right?
if
and no such thing as an upgrade.
But
right.
if you have it go, like, even at the most basic level, you can stick your Bitcoin through an exchange and they can't then track your Bitcoin, right? In the sense that they can't identify it to you. You're talking about a cryptography that's based on current models, but if we're building a system whereby the corporation can't see any of your transactions, they can get audited by the bank, and the bank says we need, or the government, and the government says we need all transactions for so-and-so. It's like, well, here's so-and-so, go get them, because we can't even look at the ones and zeros and make any sense of it.
Right. But okay, so let's narrow this down, right? So if they have the data, but the data is encrypted, the data will 20 years from now be public, right? The only way that we can have real privacy is that they just don't have the data. Why do they need the data? They don't need the data. Does it have to go in a blockchain? Probably not.
It's a free for all for Alumni Speakers. So Marco, hi.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself.
I'm sorry.
Introduce yourself.
I'm like James. I've been yelling at the screen the way I yell at Trump and Boris Johnson and a few other people. If we're going to have the discussion about whether or not cryptography is worth getting involved in because it expires every 20 years, we might as well stop discussing this right now.
Oh, no,
the reality of
Crypto is fantastic, but you have to remember you've only got a sliding 20-year window of privacy, right? So,
no, you have a sliding 20-year window with the current protocol of privacy. If you are using your brain as an infrastructure and a community, you will see the inevitable demise of your current cryptographic infrastructure coming, ideally at least a few years in advance, and will do a prune and a re-up before that day happens.
yeah.
Okay,
I
so
think what
window,
Vinay
right?
is saying that we have to, and it was what I said earlier. It's like we have to give ourselves time enough to adapt to the new systems. But if we can push, go ahead, Vinay.
Okay, let me be super specific about my claim here, right? So if we've encrypted data and put the data where the public can see it, 20 years from now, that data will be decrypted and it will be public in almost all instances. However, digital signatures are different. So if I sign something and say this was me, I can then re-sign it and re-sign it and re-sign it as we go through time to make sure that we always know that it was me that said that, right? So it's not that everything just automatically disassembles itself in 20 years. It's specifically the instance where we publish encrypted data on the basis that it's encrypted, that will always break.
I agree, which is why, again, as both Xavier and Andy, who's been chatting in the chat window quite a bit, we've had discussions, lengthy ones in the last little while, and Luke and I have had this discussion, and Wulf and I have had this discussion as well. The technology exists today to do this. It is just not blockchain. Blockchain is a component of it, but it can't be the whole thing of it, because blockchain is not actually fully decentralized.
Well, blockchain
you
is
can
like
say it is.
It's a great replacement for something like DNS, right? Like, blockchain takes one class of problems and solves them amazingly well, but you don't use DNS for doing transactions over. You don't use DNS for chat, right? It's part of an ecosystem. You could, but
right, exactly. Yeah, and the real problem lies in the fact that all blockchains are centralized to a degree. It's a question of what is that degree, right? Ethereum is centralized to arguably 100,000 people on the planet, right?
Yeah, I mean,
they control it, right?
Everything runs AWS. Everything runs on AWS, Azure, or Google. So it's centralized from that perspective.
That too.
Yeah, I mean,
one could argue that everything runs on Android and iOS, and therefore it's centralized there too.
Absolutely, but I mean, but I call that monoculture risk, right? So we got a bunch of monoculture risk for sure. When we say blockchain is centralized, I mean, the bottom line is that the blockchain's job in most applications is to be a single source of truth. And it's hard to have something which is a single source of truth and is also decentralized, but you need more than a single source of truth to make a functioning world. A single source of truth is one set of systems. Then you've got a set of systems which are like completely mutable. They erase themselves. They keep no logs. They do a different job. You got a third system which is permanent, durable, whatever it is. Like, there is no single architecture that solves all problems. Blockchain just solves a bunch of problems we couldn't solve before. Sure. But it's not the final, it's not the final system you need for cryptography.
Great. Okay. So one of the things that we discovered as a world more than 20 years ago was completely decentralized peer-to-peer file sharing. Right? Hello BitTorrent. Okay. And people will argue that trackers are points of centralization, but funny enough, trackers aren't necessarily required for BitTorrent. Right.
There's a we have magnet links, and magnet links work great.
All right, guys.
Right.
Listen,
and
I'm thrilled to have so many alumni speakers, but as a couple people are commenting to me, you guys are so good and so interesting that we're actually losing flow slightly. So I'm just gonna point to alumni speakers in order and let them kind of make a point, and I'm gonna let our panelists respond and then go sequentially through them. And just because I am the Shatner in this universe, I'm gonna go back to Wulf. Okay, I am the Shatner. So Wulf, I think you softballed, buddy. So let's come on. Let's go. You got the German accent. You can work this. Come on.
So we all want the same things, okay? So, and Xavier and I, we chatted in the chat room, and this you have to overcome trials, right? Vinay and Xavier, you have experience in this, and I have a different experience because maybe I'm less burdened and jaded or whatever framework we want to talk about, but there's no way forward without reputation. I stand by that. There is no way forward without reputation.
Okay.
And I don't want to be extra provocative.
Wait. Forward where?
We have to overcome priors. Okay?
What is it that, wait. Let me ask a question of clarification. What is it that you want to do that you need reputation for? What is the forward that we can't do because we don't have reputation?
So this goes back to my earlier question. How do we get the digital asset space, or let's even say decentralization, period. It's a word that is loaded. How do we make headways with everything that all of us agree on in this group, right? We all have sort of foundational, metaphysical, basic values that unite us. That's why we're on this chat, okay? That's why we're all together here right now. There are gradations, there's gray areas, and I don't want to talk about what that is, but we all agree on several fundamental truths, quote unquote, if we believe that there is such a thing as truth, okay? If we believe that decentralization, the word decentralization plays a role in this, it is my assertion, and I will stand by that there is no way around reputation systems and decentralized autonomous and anonymous systems in order to move the digital asset space and with it the decentralization of other systems and society forward. No way. Okay, I stand by that. I just finished the manuscript on the book, and that doesn't mean anything to people who haven't read the book. But there is no way around it.
Okay, that's an assertion, but you've got to unpack that for me. What is the atomic hang on. What is the atomic operation that you want us to be able to do that we can't do without identity? What exactly is it you want from reputation here? You say we can't move forward, but why can't we move forward? Is it because we can't estimate credit risk? Is it because we can't figure out how to do prosecution for fraud? Is it because we can't figure out how to dedupe situations to get rid of Sybils? What is the atomic problem?
So this boils down to what is decentralization. You're giving a litany of centralized products replacement that you are thinking about right now. I would go much broader. Let's agree on how do decentralized systems work. What are the core features? Once we can agree on that, it is my opinion, but this is too much for this conversation. It is my opinion that we will realize that if we agree on those core features of decentralization, there is no way around reputation systems to proliferate those features.
Well, can I just
know no way around it? And
Bitcoin mining works. Well, let me just know the Bitcoin mining works absolutely fine and has absolutely no requirement for reputation.
I'm not going to go there. Vinay, I'm not going to
what you have
because it's going to piss off
all you're making is a bunch of you're just making a bunch of bald assertions and you're not explaining your reasoning.
I wanted to keep it 30,000 level.
Right? Yeah, but it's not a 30,000 level. It's a bunch of bald assertions, right? If you can't explain to me where the problem is, I don't have to believe there's a problem.
I'm renaming the show to Crypto Wednesday's Blood Sports. I'm borrowing that. I'm going to borrow that expression.
We're only just getting started, baby.
Yeah, right. May I interpret what I would think?
Yes, Xavier and Luke,
getting at
panelists, at it. Xavier first.
I'm not taking any perspective on this other than if we are going to look at the planetary civilization from a 40,000 foot view or 10, 20 mile view, the speed at which we interact as people, the degree of efficiency with which we develop in time requires, if we are moving faster, if we are getting into a global civilization, we need to be able to interact with one another without the pitfalls of mistrust or bad actors or having to go through a number of individuals to figure out who we can get into our system to help make our dreams become true. Let's say.
Let me paraphrase what Xavier is saying. How do we bring information from the edge of society, of systems, to be useful without knowing the source and reliability of the information? That is a fundamental question in decentralized systems.
Go ahead, Wulf.
No, Luke, go ahead.
I was going to say, for me, it relates to we are we are inevitably accelerating the pace of information creation. It's, it's exponentially growing. Information is growing, growing, growing. Some would argue the point of our existence as a species is to organize information in the universe. I mean, we could get very, esoteric with this.
90% of all information was created in the last 2 years.
Yes, information is happening. It's happening, happening, happening. And that information is important for us as a coordination, a mechanism of coordinating our species together to not destroy ourselves, to hopefully go to the stars and realize Shatner's dream and all these wonderful things. If we want to do these incredible things, we actually
doubt every single word that you have just said. I doubt every single word in that, right?
The information is increasing?
No, the information is necessary for coordination. The whole point of markets is that we limit what we need to know in order to be able to coordinate.
But isn't
right?
that
What
information?
we're discussing here some kind of weird planned economy model where everybody knows everything and we make optimal decisions.
No, actually, I think it's the opposite. When we talk about decentralization, as Wulf is saying, is that you can't, what the point I was getting to is you cannot possibly know everything. It's absolutely becoming more and more unattainable. And so by that very nature, and when we think about it has to be, like you said, a market forces-based decentralized approach where you can't know everything, but you do have to know something because you do have to make decisions. So inevitably, we're going to create a situation where people are going to gravitate, maybe it's biological, maybe it's evolutionary, to hierarchies. And we've already seen the weaknesses in hierarchies. So for the first time ever as a species, we have a technology that enables us to build efficient networks that can be flatter than hierarchies, but they require some mechanism to say, I can't know every single node on the network, but I can know my local nodes, and I can build some type of understanding with those local nodes that when I understand the decision-making process for how they decided to trust another node. And maybe I can't have the bandwidth to go figure out who that other node is. I can at least defer to some degree.
So I don't think of trust as being in any way a fundamental primitive, right? So the reason that I like my models restitution-based rather than trust-based is that trust allows us to estimate the risk that we're going to get screwed, but it doesn't give us any way of getting our money back after we've been screwed. So, right, I am massively more interested in what happens after we are wronged than in estimating the risk that we will be wronged.
Because why is it or? Why is it an and? Why can't we do proactive avoidance and then deal with it if we're wrong?
Because the vast majority of the mechanisms that we build for avoidance are traps, right? You build a system thinking that you're going to be able to catch rats, and then you discover it's being used to catch, like, your kids, right? We built the system to avoid fraud.
That's the point of decentralization. You build so many systems that one system, if it were to be converted from rats to kids, it wouldn't be relevant because there's so many other systems.
Right. So you're talking about global
decentralization, right? That's this whole idea of information from the edges, but in a
so
coordinated fashion.
So let me talk specifically about information from the edges. My solution for the information problem is that information is sold in the form of consequential loss policies that protect people when they make a mistake, right? So if I buy information from you about the current temperature in Anchorage, Alaska, and I'm using that for a weather model to do, like, I don't know, agriculture, and it turns out that you give me bad information, I basically present you with a bill for my damages, and you pay me up to the agreed limit when I bought the data. If I want a much higher damages limit, I pay you more money for the information. Now, that approach where you use consequential loss warranties and insurance as a way of ensuring that we can trust data means that we only need to be able to prove that the data is associated with a worthy policy. We don't need to know anything about where the data comes from. We only need to know how good the guarantee is so that if the data is wrong, we can claim. And that means that I can take anonymous data sources, and I can take data sources that I don't know the origin of, as long as they're paired to a consequential loss policy that I can actually trust.
Now, imagine, Vinay, you could give an insurance policy fully decentralized back to the people on the loss and consequential damages that otherwise would exist in that scenario that you're outlining. That's what I'm talking about.
I don't care where the insurance comes from.
But you need reputation for that, Vinay. There's no way around that. Yes.
We need to estimate credit risk to be able to do this. We need to be able to punish bad actors. When you say reputation, you have to be more atomic. What exactly is the reputation recording?
Okay, so your concern is that there's one reputation score that rules them all.
My concern is that any form of reputation gathering is subject to abuse by people that will use those reputations in predatory ways. I regard the data as inherently dangerous.
But that's true for all data, not just reputation. Right? If you go back to my
shit. You're
right,
absolutely correct.
So I'm living in Vermont and I can be off grid, so I kind of get what you're talking about. But you know, at the end of the day, when you volunteer in, you know, to the system, that's the price.
Well, we don't have to be in a position where that's the price. We have all this marvelous new technology. We ought to be able to build information disclosure minimizing economies. You ought to be able to get through your life with an absolute minimum.
You're arguing against yourself. You just said that all data will become disclosed and all secrets are time bombs, right?
That's right. So you have to not encrypt things and then dump it into the public. You have to use channel encryption.
At the end of the day, you volunteer to enter the system, and that system has a price. Right? Whether you want to consent to it or agree to it, you have to do by your actions, not your words, right? If you want to join in and you're an informed consumer, then you come in and you understand that everything you type into a screen will be public. Anyone who thinks they enter anything into a computer screen without the anticipation that it will be seen by other people is fooling themselves, right? So once you do that, you volunteered, you forked in. Okay, you can take a hard fork right here. You could turn off all the electricity in your house and go get water manually and kill your own goats, and you wouldn't have this problem. But once you want to take advantage of the other things that are happening out there, you need to pay the price, and this is the price.
Well, okay.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, I want Xavier to jump in. Xavier, because you've kind of done your survivalist, off the grid, you know, man in the mountains thing. Talk to us about.
Well, I think the fundamental concern on Vinay's side is centralization of power and authority, not simply to be able to release you from prison or whatever, but to actually enforce one's will upon a population. Right? The Germans got in. The Nazis, let's say, they got into a position where they had access to IBM information and they utilized it against an entire group of people. Right? So with the concern there is that putting any of this data, taking part in this system, to James's point, puts you at an inherent risk of authoritarian control to limit your choices and free will and create essentially a robotic human slave who doesn't have choices but has to serve the system like a battery or like a chicken in a farm, right? Because there are intelligent humans and intelligent forces that know how to organize humanity in such a way, limit their choices, and get them to take a vaccine, for instance, that nobody knows what is in, right? So we're looking at a totalitarian level of control that is unheard of because it becomes a planetary thing. With this digitalization and level of magnification of detail of humans, right? And so the question then becomes, can we protect an individual in a system of control that is decentralized enough that does not allow the consolidation of power into one subset of category of humans that can do and impose their will upon the other subsets?
Can I add two things in there? Because it's totally
nice and clear. That's good. Good frame.
Yeah, because we want to build these systems. We just don't want to get them in the hands of people who are going to abuse them and then enslave the rest of humanity, right? We want a higher level of granularity. In heaven, let's say, our concepts of heaven, you can't hide your emotions from one another. You feel each other. You understand one another. You are one, right? So what we're trying to do is we're trying to build a technological system which mimics that so that we can have that experience as a soul on the planet, in my opinion, that we can develop our soul's refinement, right? And we want to make sure that those systems are in place that we can do so at a higher degree of granularity.
All right, now I'm gonna. It's like I'm gonna remoderate. All right, James, since you're frothing, go.
So I'm frothing, exactly. So I want to tie in two of my favorite philosophers here, David Chaum and Neil Stephenson. Okay, so David Chaum basically thinks that all the cryptography, he's a preeminent cryptographer, inventor of maybe even the blockchain, of digital money, etc. And he believes that all the cryptography that we use, which he represents in the world, is going to be broken and is flawed.
Already, quantum computers. Boom.
Exactly. So that's A, okay? So he believes that the way you attain anonymity is by obfuscation, that there's so much data out there that you just overwhelm the systems, and that the way that you gain this level to protect yourself against the fears that we're talking about is by obfuscation, not by actually hiding in plain sight, okay? And the second,
the chanting stuff, right?
Right, exactly. This is like Chaumian mixing to get your Bitcoin anonymous, right? The second, but Neil Stephenson talked about avatars and how we can start to perform our behavior through entities that we form that could execute our activities, which essentially is just a wallet with AI, right? And algorithmically driven, that we can set out, that can perform and act for us and gather information and interact for us, so that we could have several we could act as many participants. We can decentralize ourselves, so that the part of me that has sex fetishes could be different than the part of me that educates children. I mean, scary thought, but if you think about it, you could actually, you no longer have to be this centralized. The problem that you're seeing about how you get regulated and how the politics affect you is that you're centralized. You're a single point of failure. You're someone that
what he just described. That's exactly right. Those are two different DAOs with two different reputation scores. They together define a person. It's not one score that defines the person. Jim is exactly right, in my opinion, the way that can be portrayed.
I was about to say, Luke,
go ahead, Luke.
Jump in.
Yeah.
I want to hear Luke.
Yeah, there's an additional piece about this that it comes back to, and we should have given a warning to this show. Deep philosophy. We're going to be philosophical. We're not going to show you, screenshots of code of how we're implementing identity and reputation on the blockchain. We're actually going to talk about the reasons, the philosophical underpinnings for why or why not we should do this. So that was the reason why I wanted Xavier and Vinay on this call, because I knew that's what it would be about. So it might feel a little off topic sometimes because we're going into the reasons. And this goes, to me, all the way down to a deeper reason of, what do we believe about humanity? Philosophically, is humanity, essentially evil, or is humanity essentially good? And this relates to this topic in my mind, because why this is important is, just as we're saying, hey, we don't want the bad people to do bad things, when you have radical transparency, you also expose the act of doing bad things in a way that people can say, are we okay with that? Is that actually who we are as a species? Are we fine with this group of people who also have a reputation, who we actually know something about, implementing these systems? Like, who's actually producing that, in your example, a vaccine, right? Who's producing the vaccine? Who's the supplier? Who's the distributor? These people become known. When we talk about the problem with, totalitarian states, who's a violent police officer, who's an enforcer of the state, who's signing up for the army to go bomb people in some other country, when we actually know them as individuals with reputation, there's a moment where you can say, hey, actually, that's not okay with me. And you can have a conversation with them, and you can engage with them and say, hey, you're reputationally connected to my circle, and this is an aspect of what you're doing that is harming other people. And so if I believe that humanity has the potential, and maybe not, it's too much to say that humanity is good, but it has the potential to be good, that we have a mechanism with reputation and identity that can't be manipulated or hidden in such a way that you can say, hey, you know what? This is what I believe about the future, and this is what I'm going to hold my connections accountable to. And that's going to create amazing conversations where you're like, yay, Trump, and someone else is like, that's terrible. How could you say that? And then you have to interact, and then you have to grow your consciousness, and then you have to evolve to another level of understanding.
Xavier,
Go and burn down each other's churches. Right?
Yeah,
I think 1,000 years of religious war in Europe, and we're going to have people recording what church they go to on a blockchain? Are we crazy?
Okay, pause. We're going to go there. But Xavier, you had your hand up, talk.
It goes back to the fundamental issue that we're talking about. How much time can we give ourselves? Because every solution becomes the problem. Every solution, every good savior becomes the Lucifer, right? All of it, and how the distance between it being implemented and it turning into the devil, we have given ourselves a little bit more time in space to figure out the solution for the next iteration, right? Because for us to evolve as a species and to address you, look, it comes down to accountability. If we can hold, right now there is no accountability for the Soroses, the Royal Death Racket, the nobles, all of these people who are doing horrible shit, that Bill Gates, like the fact that somebody doesn't go out and just murder him on the streets is crazy to me, because because of the accountability they would have for that action, right? And so what we need accountability for all of these actors, all of these people doing all of these various things, so that we can stabilize the system. Right now, we're
even say they're a nation of laws, not men.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Like, who are you going to turn to when your laws are lawless? So you have to come up with systems that allow you to put that control back in the hands of the decentralized mob without turning it into a maniacal mob that's burning everything down, right?
So a reasonable update of democracy that puts power back under the control of law.
Yeah, exactly. Right? And to do so with accountability.
Let me throw this in there.
Well,
all these decentralized systems.
Stop. Let me
Vinay, go.
countersink this here, right?
Okay.
So the argument that you're making there, Xavier, is more or less identical to the argument that the founding fathers made about British rule, right? We have a king, the king is unaccountable, they're abusing their power. We need to make sure that the people make law, and then the law is equally applied to everybody. Like, there is a completely uncontroversial statement of that opinion that goes back hundreds of years that was commonly held to be the universal method for running society. I don't think there's anything there that in an American context would raise a single eyebrow. It's just the language that you use to describe it. What do we want? We want equal justice under law. Who makes the law? The people or their appointed representatives. Who enforces the law? The appointed representatives of the people. The law applies equally to everybody regardless of station. You could have said that to Thomas Jefferson. He wouldn't have raised an eyebrow. Then you say, well, we've got a bunch of crazy new technology to implement that equilibrium, because this whole business of putting X's on pieces of paper once every 4 years has kind of rotted out. And, you know, like, we don't even cook food the way that we did 300 years ago. Why do we vote the same way, right? So there is a really conservative way of framing this, which is just like, we need new technology to apply commonly agreed American constitutional principles, and nobody's going to raise an eyebrow, right? But then there's a much more radical claim, which is kind of the crypto-anarchist claim, and that's something radically different. So I wanted to draw that distinction between equal justice under law.
But the crypto-anarchist claim relies on everybody not being monsters, and everybody are monsters. So if
things get real complicated.
So exactly.
Okay, Wulf, Ian, and then James.
So Vinay and Xavier are both great. So the train has left the station.
Wulf is so serious. It's like every time he speaks, it's like, boom.
These information systems, they're out, they're proliferating, and I'm being provocative now. Government cannot hold against it. It's impossible. How do you, to quote Xavier, how do you coordinate the decentralized mob? That's the fundamental question. How do you coordinate the decentralized mob? And you know my answer, right? There's no way around it. As long as, but it's possible.
I agree.
So, I mean, let's take some examples of successful coordination of decentralized mobs. The free and open source software world, right, has roughly $200 billion of assets. And this is not counting cryptocurrency. I'm talking about Apache and Chromium and all the rest of that stuff, right? Hundreds of billions of dollars supporting of pretty much the world's entire technical infrastructure. And that was built by decentralized mobs with very strong hierarchical structures, right? The vast majority of those groups either have a single monolithic leader like Linus Torvalds for Linux, or they have a democratic structure like the Apache Software Foundation, where you've got half a dozen people on a board and they vote for who's in charge. Right? So we know that it's possible to do enormous amounts of value creation with a system which is basically like hundreds of tiny little countries, each one of which is ruled by a king or a small democratic group. And we know that works. How far can we scale that? What else can we do? Has it been subverted? Those are all open questions. But we've got a couple of $100 billion worth of software which is supporting exactly what we're doing right now. I mean, it's running our video calls for us. So it's not that we don't have any taillights to follow, right? Free software development is an example of massive coordination and massive value generation in an environment that didn't really have much of this kind of technical infrastructure. And your passport in that world is your GitHub repo, where you can show people the proof of what you've done by pointing at the files and saying, I wrote those. Right? So,
well, that's a great example, right? Your GitHub in that example is your reputation. If
well,
GitHub is a centralized entity that
no, it's your history. It's not your reputation. It's your history. That's a really important distinction.
Well, to me, okay, so let's discuss that, because I feel like that's a little bit.
That's the key. You have to link the two. You have to link the reputation with a system of precedent that creates history to keep people accountable. That is absolutely key. Weighted graph theory is the key here, in my opinion. I
agree. I think it's a bit pedantic to say that, you know, this history about someone is somehow separate from reputation. To me, those are so intertwined.
History is objective. Reputation is generally subjective.
But you cannot do anything meaningful with history without automatically making judgments about it and formulating a reputation about that person. Otherwise, it's just data that has no information.
I take exception to that. The reputation is subjective. Reputation can be subjective. It does not have to be.
Well, your interpretation of it is going to be inherently subjective.
Well, this comes back
your
to
interpretation as an individual, yes, but the actual data, because I'm having it.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. You have data backing up your reputation, as in your GitHub history. That's what Wulf. I'm almost positive he's going to agree with me here. Right? Your data gives you reputation, not what people think of you.
So could your data then be tied to value? Let's say value instead of reputation, right? Like you work in XYZ corporation and you have skills in, you know, Google Drive, like all of the different, you know, things that you can have skills in, putting a car engine together, building an electric battery, whatever. So it's not so much reputation, but it is merit. It's not what religion you are, what church you go to. It's how spiritual you are, or how everybody.
Reputation.
Can I
exactly?
Yeah, total nomenclature, right?
So you have to have a system that builds the reputation in a way that is fully decentralized and creates exactly what Xavier describes, right? And you have to tie it to a historical record of how you created that to be accountable.
So this sounds a little bit like Avogadro. Remember the system about 15 years ago where they set up a sort of web of trust type model for free software developers. So they started out with 4 guys that were regarded as masters, and they then certified other masters, and they certified fellows, and they certified apprentices, and the whole thing gave you a notion of where somebody was in the free software ecosystem. And that was a big system back in the day, right? I don't think it even had a cryptographic underlayer, but it had a very good reputation metric based on these kind of combination of ratings. So those kinds of systems, they have stood up, they have worked. The problem is the privacy that goes along with them, right? We're going to have to take the hit somewhere because we don't have the ability to have perfectly transparent histories and meaningful privacy protections. And it's a question of basically how do we arbitrage these two values against each other? We want to be able to get historical data about the people we do business with. How many roofs have you put on houses in the past 5 years? 112. And of that 112, in how many cases did you screw the job up? Twice. Okay, you're a pretty good roofer, right? We want that kind of history, but then if some bastard comes in and says, right, well, we're rounding up everybody that's doing roofing work illegally, and it turns out this guy is not licensed, now we have a problem, right? Because the same data trail that we leave in the form of this history becomes an evidence trail as soon as somebody changes the law on us.
No.
Okay, James, I was about to say, James, it's you.
Yeah. No.
James's turn.
First of all, we're basing our arguments on so many assumptions. You know,
yes.
First of all, the assumption that there is such a thing as good and bad, right, is an assumption, right? One man's good is another man's bad, right?
I was going to bring that up. Thank you for doing it.
History is written by the winners, right? Blah blah blah. So you really, once you go into this is better than that, once you're telling me how I should judge the data, then you're stepping into exactly the same pile of dog shit that we're trying to dissect. right? That's the first thing. So you just have to examine your thoughts and see whether you're putting the ideas of good and bad. If you are, then you have to re-examine that, right? So that's the first piece that I think that we really need to, that I'd like to just add into this conversation, because I think it's really smart what we're saying. The second thing is, when you go back to, I think it was Xavier who was just mentioning the idea that you could have a database of how many roofs did you make, and 20 of them are still standing and good, and then get a read that the guy wasn't certified and so therefore is a bad actor. Okay, this gets into the whole thing. First of all, whether that's good or bad, any of those points is neutral, and the idea that the certification isn't there should just be another data point. It shouldn't then color or change the other data points. It should enable me to make my own decision based on all those data points. And I get to choose how I prioritize them. And what I want out of the system is just truth without trusting. I want just the data points so that I can build my own algorithm, so that avatar of me, which is doing that activity, can then act in a way that's rational according to my desires. And I think that's how I would cut through this.
I love that, because that's exactly the point I was trying to make, James, and I think you made it better, is I don't want to come into this conversation with the assumption that there are, cartoon morality, good guys and bad guys, that there are these evil actors that if we build this system, they're just going to destroy humanity. Because I think the exact opposite is also true, that the transparency that a system like this can provide, that someone who is acting in a way that's against, and we'll define evil as maybe more so against consensus in some way that is detrimental to whatever they define as the progress of that community. And again, it could be.
Did you just say that evil was going against the local consensus? Are you out of your mind?
Well, when I say consensus, I'm not talking 100% consensus. I'm talking about.
I'm not talking. But the very definition that other people's stupid herd behavior tells me whether my actions are good or evil is insane.
That is reality, Vinay, though. When I'm in a community...
Let
me explain.
Order.
Vinay, let me explain.
We're going to
Don't make Gordon mute you.
I will lay down the hammer. I will Shatner you. I want Xavier.
Let me explain. When I say that, what I mean is back to Xavier's example.
No, we must get clarity about this, right?
Then let me explain, please.
No. Hold your goddamn fucking order, right? We had three or four regimes that collectively killed 250 million fucking people in the last century.
I'm very familiar with democide. 260 million people. I get it.
Joke.
No, I get it. But please let me explain. When I talk about consensus,
no. Shut up. If you got it, you would not be able to say the things you say. Right?
When I say consensus, you assumed I meant nation state
lies.
Okay, Vinay, even if he's wrong,
game, right?
Even if Luke is wrong, I want to hear what he has to say. I want to hear the correct information. Luke, give me the correct information.
Let me finish what I'm saying here, Gordon.
Okay.
If we do not have clear reasoning about what is moral, right? If we cannot distinguish good and evil in some kind of sensible way, or decide we're not distinguishing good and evil at all, everything that we build will turn into murder.
Okay, now
right?
Luke,
these questions and make some kind of vague assertion about what's good or what's evil, right? We have to not have vague assertions about good or evil. We need absolutely clear, explicit moral reasoning. Because this is the new politics.
Okay, Vinay, can I ask you to be quiet for a period of time?
No. Everyone, I will Shatner you. Wulf, stop. Vinay, stop. Luke, play.
Okay. I appreciate what you're saying, Vinay, and I agree that it's important that we do this carefully. But I didn't get a chance to explain my point before you shut me down. I want to be able to explain my point. When I talk about consensus, I'm not talking about immediately a nation state level of consensus, which you keep going to. I'm talking about back to community, back to how our species has always been for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years in small Dunbar number tribes. We do use consensus. So when I say that is the reality today, please let me speak.
Vinay, sorry, I love you, buddy. I just meant you. I want to hear the complete thought.
My personal relationships in my life are defined by those connections I have within what I would call my tribe, the people on this call, the people I interact with. And I do think about consensus because it gives me information about who I am and how I interact in the world. If I screw over my kids or my wife or my friend, they give me information about who I am as an actor, and that colors my morality. It actually makes me think, oh, that was harmful. I didn't know that about myself. That's not who I see myself to be. That's not who I want to become. And I actually define my interactions with the world based on these communities that I build. And that's the point when I say consensus does in those groups define in a tribal way how we interact with each other in terms of, is that the best way to treat someone?
But those communities are historically cannibalistic, right? They turn on homosexuals, they turn on witches, they turn on people with different political beliefs, they turn on the disabled or the deformed, they turn on the mentally ill.
Not the communities I've chosen to be part of, Vinay. I think you're really making a broad brush saying, I get to choose which communities. And the person who tries to do that in a community I voluntarily chose to be a part of gets shunned. They say, hey, we don't actually want to discriminate at that level. And we're starting to see society as a whole say,
hey, now pause. Xavier.
Build tooling on these assumptions, you're going to get hell on earth.
Okay, Xavier.
Yeah, I kind of want to bridge you guys, because what Luke was saying was basically like, in the tribal communities of life, like we had found success based on everybody agrees on a certain thing. Like, okay, but it's true, Vinay, like the gays, like let's say that like a tribe gets together and they're like, that person's different. Fuck them, we're kicking them out, right? That's kind of what's happened in history. And that's to your point, saying like, just because you have a group of people together saying, hey, this is consensus reality, doesn't mean it's moral or good, right? It just means that what they're doing to survive. Yeah, and Luke agrees with that.
Is that the individual has rights regardless of what the community or the nation says.
Right.
Right.
So you have to have.
We have a constitutional framing is to specifically place limits on what democracy can do to people.
Correct. So what Luke's point here is that that's historically what has happened. It's not necessarily what is right, but we get to choose now what communities we want to be a part of, and so we have to choose. So, but in a decentralized,
elites get to choose what communities they're part of. That is
this is what the technology enables us to do, Vinay. This is why this is so important.
Well, we have to hold those
playing field so that everyone gets to play, where previously only the elites got to play.
But the danger is Fahrenheit 51. The danger is like equalizing everybody and nobody, and who owns that farm. What we're talking about is farming humans right now. The economic life force and the power of humanity. How do we best farm humans, and who is running the farm? Right now, it's been the elites. It's been other humans, or if you think they're reptiles, I don't give a shit. But it's been other people farming the population. And we're talking about building and now we're talking about building the farm in such a way that the farm manages the farm. And I've got to bounce in 5 minutes, so I don't.
Okay, we're actually wrapping up. So hold on. I'm gonna let Wulf. You have a soundbite. James, you have a soundbite, and David Johnston. I'm going to give you a standby, and Michael Healy, you each got a 1 minute. This is a throwdown.
Wait, is Johnston in here?
Okay, Marco, fast.
I think I can
also. I said, whoa, fast, go.
Yeah. I think I can, like Xavier, I can bring some unifying efforts to this. I think that decentralized, so DAOs that are reputation-driven DAOs can overcome a lot of the problems in society going forward. However, the force code power and stability that they give society depends, and here's Vinay correct, depends on transcendental unifying values. Because the DAOs themselves, while they can coordinate the quote unquote decentralized mob, they still need a fulcrum, a core unifying value system. Without that, those DAOs will fall apart. How we create that, Vinay, that is an open question. That's where I end my book. Exactly that point.
Okay, well,
that's the point where I end, and I can't tell you what the answers are, but the transcendental unifying values are inescapable for DAOs in the future, for the greater good of society.
Okay, now pause. Fantastic. David Johnston, give us a minute of you, Mr. Dapp.
I just have to say hi, David. Miss you.
Hi, David.
Crypto Wednesdays is community, and you're all now in the Alumni Speakers group. So y'all get to talk. David, go.
So I think what we're struggling with here is we've got two parallel systems. We have a nation state-based system, which ultimate settlement layer is in violence, right? All of human history, right? The strongest man, the system that coordinates the people with the guns, that's ultimately what happens, right? So all law, to Vinay's point, is, inherently difficult and oppressive. And so the question is how to limit what the group can do with violence. Now we have an alternative system that's ultimate settlement layer is math. And I think the important point made by Vinay and echoed by others is we have to define those freedom and liberty axioms that this math settlement layer is going to uphold. Is that self-custody? Is that privacy? Is that transparency? Is it, any of these things? We have to do a good job of defining those, because that math settlement layer is agnostic and it's going to enforce whatever we decide is what we want to opt into. So we need to think about that very carefully. And I'm talking to some
Okay, now, James. Thank you, David. Okay, next.
Thanks,
James, David, you're awesome. Love you. You and David need to talk. James Haft, go.
Okay. So I think I'm going to change gears a little bit in my closing minute. Thank you very much. It's very important to separate what you want to happen from what might or could happen. And so whether or not humans are by nature violent or not, and whether the man with the most guns or not works may or may not be true. But that doesn't affect how the systems work or how people, or how people will behave. It's just another factor in the decision. So, the idea that you fight, you have to have a sense of morality and of good and evil, because otherwise everyone kills each other. That may or may not be true, but it's not actually relevant in how you calculate what's going to happen, right? And so we as humans have a responsibility, we believe, most of us on this call, to try and make things happen positive for ourselves and for our progeny, because we want to leave the world a better place. But that may not be human nature, and that may not even be possible. So I think it's more interesting to think as individual actors, what do I need to do to protect myself and those around me? And how do I make that circle bigger and bigger and bigger so I can create a better world, focusing on those things that we can control, not those things that we can't.
Great. Now, final word of the guest speakers, Marco.
Oh, thank you. I got two quick ones. One, morality. That is subjective. It has been subjective for all time. It will continue to be subjective. Morality has no place in the design of any kind of system like this. Morality, where you're talking about decentralization, morality is a personal choice, not a group enforcement. That's just my personal opinion. Keep it out. Number two.
And he muted himself. Awesome. Or I can't hear him. Okay, Marco, I'm sure it would have been awesome, but I can't hear a word you're saying. So, okay.
We can hear him. No, everyone else can hear him. So everyone else can hear me.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say this one last thing, is that if we're trying to go from the village to the globe, and if we're going to go from the village to the globe, we have to try to figure out what worked in the village and figure out how to make that work for the globe.
Awesome. Okay, I want to, Luke, you delivered, man. This is as promised. This is freaking blood sports. I love it. I got, it's early in the LA and I feel like I got enough energy for the next month. I want to go out and make love and kill people. Not at the same time though. So Luke Stokes, thank you so much for introducing us to Xavier Hawk and Vinay Gupta and the Hexa-Yurt and just all this interesting conversation. I want to thank our alumni speakers for joining. Hopefully this is all recorded. We're going to post this on YouTube. Sonder, wow, what the heck did we make, brother? I don't know, but I'm going to hand it to you to wrap up. This is like, I got the blood flowing. This is like intellectual Adderall. Let's go.
I think, Gordon, this show, and I'm really excited about it, this made impact. So although sometimes we disagree, but we can agree to disagree, which is all good. We all respect each other. I think the conversations were really good. And I would like to invite everybody that was here in the show, not only the speakers and the alumni speakers, but also everybody listening in. Join us next week because